There's a lot of things that we could talk about the Electoral College. It's kind of difficult in some ways to understand. Most states have a winner-take-all system. There are some that will give percentages. But the idea behind it was originally it was a check and a balance on the people. If the people had elected an individual who was not considered worthy by the electors to serve, initially they had the right to override the popular vote. Now that has been very unlikely to happen in this day and age. But theoretically, constitutionally, it could happen. Under our two-party system, which please understand, our two-party system is not in the Constitution. It has developed through the years. It is very much a part of our political fabric now, but it's not in the Constitution. The Constitution recognizes the fact that there might be the rare occasion that no one would receive the requisite number of electoral votes. When that happens, the House of Representatives constitutionally elects the President of the United States. The Senate chooses the Vice President. I know that there has been one instance where the House did the electing, and that was John Quincy Adams. I don't think there has been another time beside that, but you could check me on that. But the electors were designed to be a state check on federal power and to protect the smaller states. Article 2 goes on to determine that a president must be, number one, a natural-born citizen. Now, back in the summer, Doug heard on the radio, riding around in his truck, that a young woman in college, when she heard that the President of the United States must be a natural-born citizen, was very indignant. She said, that is unfair. That's why I don't like the Constitution. I don't think a person should be disqualified from being president just because they were born by cesarean birth. It's a true story. You did hear that, didn't you? However, that's not what the Constitution means by a natural-born citizen. A natural-born citizen must be either born in the United States or born to parents who are citizens. They may be born abroad as long as their parents are citizens of the United States. However, they must be a resident of the United States for at least 14 years before becoming President of the United States and at least 35 years old. There's another critical principle, I think, tucked behind this, and that was that our founding fathers were very, very concerned about eliminating as much foreign influence in our country as possible. Joanne and I were just talking. We received something from Jay Sekulow just yesterday about the Palestinians wanting to take Israel and the United States to an international court. And he pointing out, number one, the Palestinians are not even a sovereign nation, and yet they want to drag the United States into an international court where that court begins to make rules for the sovereign nation of the United States. Our founding fathers were very concerned that they minimize foreign influence, and we must keep that in mind as we're making decisions as a nation. In Article 2, our founders laid out a secession plan We're not going to go into that because it has been altered any number of times. One of the issues that has not been entirely solved is that the president, or the Constitution talks about the vice president acting as president. There are some scholars who will still say the vice president shouldn't actually become the president. He will just act as the president. Now, I'm not going to get into splitting hairs about that, but if you hear people talking about it, you'll know kind of a little bit about what the background is. The vice president does succeed the president, serves as acting president, also if the president is alive but unable to fulfill the duties of his office. So we've had instances where the President of the United States was going to have surgery or something, and he would sign a temporary order allowing the Vice President to act in his stead until he was able again to fulfill the duties of his office. If the Vice Presidency becomes vacant, the President nominates a new Vice President subject to the confirmation of the majority of both houses. We saw this happen when Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew stepped down as Vice President, and he replaced him with Gerald Ford. If both the presidency and the vice presidency were to become vacant, now before you cheer, which we don't want to do that because, I said it before and I mean it. I don't want to live in a country where we're shooting our leaders, when we're constantly in an uproar. The orderly transition of power that we have under the Constitution is a gift from God. But if both the presidency and the vice presidency becomes vacant, through a series of different acts that have been modified, and you can see all the different years there, the present succession is now the Vice President and the Speaker of the House. So at this current time, Mrs. Pelosi is the third in line for the presidency. Then the President Pro Tem of the Senate, who I fear, the person who's been acting in this position somewhat, but I need to check myself for sure, is Al Franken. So, and then we go from there to the cabinet officers according to the date in which that cabinet office was established. And the first one is the Department of State. So the fifth in line would be Hillary Clinton at this present time. So this is the seniority, and it goes down through the cabinet offices. George Washington had requested that he be allowed to serve gratis. He was not allowed to do that. The Constitution at the time made a provision for a $25,000 compensation. In 2009 dollars, that was $566,000. So that was a pretty fair amount. And I thought this was one example of budget cutting I would have never expected. Because the compensation of the president today is $400,000. So the compensation of the president has not kept pace with inflation. So I would have thought it might have been more, but I was kind of happy about that. The President of the United States makes a salary of $400,000. They're given an expense account of $50,000, $100,000 for travel, $19,000 for entertainment. But what is interesting is that many of the services that are provided to the President in the White House, he has to pay for. He has to pay for his own dry cleaning. Ronald Reagan said that was one of the biggest shocks that he had, was after he'd been there 30 days. He said he thought that was great. He said his suit's down every day and the shirts, and he thought it was wonderful. Man, I just drop them in a bin and they come back clean and pressed. And he said 30 days later he got a rather significant dry cleaning. So he said he started wearing his suits twice before he got them. But they are required to pay for some of the services that are provided for them in the White House. This part of the Constitution sets down the oath that the President of the United States is going to make. Their job is to preserve, to protect, and to defend the Constitution. At the time of his first inaugural, George Washington added the words, "So help me God." And from that point on, that has been a tradition, although it is not constitutionally mandated. At this point, in Section 2, we turn to the powers and the duties of the President. And the word powers is very important. We have to have fixed in our mind this principle. Rights come from God to people. People share their rights with government in giving them certain powers. And so the powers of the President are here enumerated. And the very first one to be mentioned is that the President is to serve as the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy and state militias when they are called into federal service. Now, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I'm going to put this out for you to think about. When our founding fathers thought about what is this person going to be responsible for, the first thing that came to their mind is the protection of the country. And I think that ought to be a standard that we continue to demand today. That whoever serves in that executive position is more worried about protecting Americans and American people and protecting our country than he is any other agenda item. I think it should be significant. Now, you'll remember from last week that it's Congress that declares war, but it's the President who has, Congress makes the basic rules, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but it is the President who gives the day-to-day orders and more specific regulations. Remember that our founding fathers were very suspicious of a standing army. They never envisioned a military like we have today. Now, taking a little sidelight, something that is not constitutional, but it is the manner in which we are operating today, was established in 1973 in what is called the War Powers Resolution. This is a Vietnam-era resolution in which the Congress became rather unhappy, feeling that the President of the United States was taking too great a latitude in committing troops overseas. As a result, the War Powers Resolution says that the President can commit troops without congressional approval for only up to 60 days. Now, at the end of that 60 days, if Congress has not approved those troops being placed overseas, the President has up to 30 days to withdraw them in a fashion that he deems best for their safety. So essentially, under the War Powers Act, the President of the United States can commit troops for up to 90 days. Now, one of the things that's important is that no court has ever ruled on the War Powers Resolution. And in fact, there is such uncertainty as to how a court might rule, constitutional or unconstitutional. In order to avoid a constitutional showdown, what we have seen over the last few years, 30 or 40 years, is the relying on UN resolutions rather than the United States Congress actually declaring a military